Welcome to a new episode in our series Astrology in the 21st Century. Today with a very special guest from the Bahamas, from Nassau in the Bahamas, Mychal A. Bryan. Welcome.
Good morning, Volker. Thank you so much for having me here.
Quite welcome. And we take the computer for support, as always, or mostly. Okay, before we jump back in the biography of Mychal, I will show you how you can find the additional information. It's on this AstroTalk canal, and the address is astrotalk.vonabisw.de. And if you scroll down, you find the talk with Mychal Ashton Bryan, and here we have the topic, me and astrology since I was 12. We will start soon with that topic. Here is some oversight information about what he's doing nowadays. We will probably come to that later in the talk. And there's a special film list about his work in the Oraculos Podcast, the philosophy and the traditional astrology behind the QABALISTIC tarot. Very interesting. It's 52 videos at the moment in this playlist with Mychal on. In these videos, he is playing my part. He's the host and he has guests. And I recommend to watch them all, but very interesting is Jen's art on triplicity rulers and Uranian astrology, because in this video, Mychal is talking about his personal cosmology and belief system. So now we start and jump back. Mychal, where did you live when you were 12?
When I was 12 years old, I was living here in Nassau, Bahamas.
And in one of your videos, you mentioned that in the age of 12, you started somehow with astrology. And I believe with the age of 13, you started with yoga. Is that right?
It was around that same 12 and 13 that I got into both astrology and yoga, yes.
Tell the stories.
So when I was 12 years old and throughout my entire childhood, I always was interested in the esoterics, and whether that was Kabbalah or tarot or runes or I Ching and astrology as well.
Wait a minute. That's not normal for a child. How on earth did a young child in Nassau in the Bahamas touch on these fields? That's normally for adult people.
You know, I think what was fortunate at that time was that I had a very rich imagination, but it was also very influenced by television and just watching whether it was cartoons or TV shows or reading books. And I think around that time, the book Harry Potter had come out at the same time. So around that age, there was this global reimagination of what magic could be, and that was happening through television and through film and through books and through things that I was reading. And so I think that there was a part of me that genuinely and sincerely felt as if that magical tradition that was being encapsulated in these books and films and TV shows, that this magical tradition wasn't just how something that was created in Hollywood, but I felt as if it had some root within our antiquity. And so at the time when I was getting into these things, I was getting into it with a very Hollywood thought about what I'd be able to do. Okay, I'm going to be able to tell the future, and I'm going to be able to do all of this fun, amazing, magical things. And then when I went into my first metaphysical bookstore and I saw some of the books that were there and some of the content that was there, it completely changed my mind, because I realized that it wasn't about this flashy external display of magic, but it was these deep internal traditions of magic. And astrology was a major part of that for me. I had the great fortune of coming into astrology around the same time that I came into Kabbalistic tarot. And the version of tarot that I studied wasn't just the regular, idiot's guide to tarot, but it was this deep astrologically based approach to tarot that was based on the Hermetic Kabbalah, which is some of the work that was being done by the Golden Dawn in the early 20th century. And the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, out of which we get people like Aleister Crowley and Arthur Edward Waite and Paul Foster Case, and all of these early pioneers of the Western mystery tradition. So it was a very astrologically based approach to tarot. And for that reason, I heard the name Ptolemy very early as well. So my initial contact point with learning real astrology was me learning essentially classical approaches to essential dignities. And so very early on, I knew what the decans were. And very early on, I knew what the Chaldean order was. And because of that, I had to subscribe, or I had to learn classical rulerships very early. So I was saying to someone recently that I never really knew about this modern version of rulership until quite recently. This whole concept that Pluto rules Scorpio and Uranus rules Aquarius and Neptune rules Pisces, that really wasn't a part of my foundational astrological training, because I was learning astrology alongside the Kabbalistic tarot. And in order for the Kabbalistic tarot to work, we have to go back to classical astrology. So I had a very safe container in which to grow very classical concepts about not just my magical philosophy about the world, but also my approach to this astrology was held in this very safe way where I was learning very specific things as opposed to the entire ocean of what astrology could be.
And was that done basically by books, or did you find mentors very early on?
That was done by books. Everything within my early childhood was done through books. And I have a very strict mind with myself when I learn anything. So I was very Saturnian about it. And so I found the oldest books I could find, and I pored over those books day in and day out. And from that, because I was really the only person around, the Bahamas is a tiny country compared to some place like Germany or the United States. So because I was really one of the only people around doing that, my popularity, it spread very quickly because everybody wanted to get a reading. Everybody wanted to send their friends to get readings. My mother would send her boss to get a reading. And so my aunts, my cousins, my schoolmates, like everyone around me was coming to me for readings. So at a very young age, I also had this training in how to be a professional. And, as I look back, I can't really remember exactly what I was doing back then. But in retrospect, I know that I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. And I know that it must have been, I can't imagine what I was saying to people at the age of 13, 14, but I knew that I was desperately, sincerely wanting to be right. And so this concept of accuracy was also something that just landed in my heart, that if you're going to be doing this, you have to be right. If you're going to be doing this, you have to be accurate. And so I don't think it ever occurred to me that I should give myself space to not be right. And so because of that, I had this very harsh disciplinarian over myself, which was me, in the shape of me judging myself based on how accurate I was. So while I may not have been the most technical or the most technically trained young child practicing these things, I was very harsh on myself that you have to get it right, you have to get it right, you have to get it right. And I think that harshness over myself allowed me to form a very rock solid practice that I later on developed as an adult.
During this book reading, does that include the books about and from people from the Golden Dawn, like Rigardi? Did you read these 3 books?
Most definitely. I definitely read Israel Regardie,
Okay.
I loved Israel Regardie for a number of reasons. One, because of the relationship that he had with Aleister Crowley, and the, I dare say, the very rocky relationship he had with Aleister Crowley. And I just loved how he was able to talk about these things in a way that made sense to people. Whereas you read something from Arthur Edward Waite, and it just goes completely over your head because Waite, it seemed, was just trying to talk for the sake of talking. He wasn't necessarily trying to talk for the sake of being helpful. And then you have people like Crowley, who was trying to talk to be helpful, but still talking in a very complicated and convoluted way. So, amongst the Golden Dawn characters, Israel Regardie is one of the people whose work I cherish a lot, followed very closely by Paul Foster Case, who is the founder of BOTA, the Builders of the Adytum, which is an offshoot of the Golden Dawn. So Israel Regardie and Paul Foster Case are two of the early Golden Dawn members whose work I'm deeply inspired by.
How about Levi and Papus?
How about
Levi and Papus, the French authors.
Levi? So Eliphas Levi, and I think you're referring to his book, the doctrine, the doctrine of high magic.
For example, or his book on initiates that was translated by Lee Lehman recently.
Astrology for the initiates. Yes.
Right.
So I have the book Astrology for Initiates somewhere on my shelf, and the doctrine and ritual of high magic is what I first got introduced to him by. And actually, that's not even true. I got introduced to him through a much smaller book on Kabbalah, and I loved his work. I loved pieces of his work. I didn't connect with all of it because I'm not trying to really practice magic within the Eliphas Levi tradition or within the Golden Dawn tradition, and I'm not necessarily a quote unquote magician in the official traditional shape of the word. So there's a lot within the books that I don't resonate with just because it's not a part of my practice, but I love a lot of what he wrote about the tarot and about what he wrote about astrology, and he did some really wonderful things. And Papus, I think, you're referring to the Tarot of the Bohemians, yes?
Yes.
I haven't really gotten into that.
Okay.
At all much.
Touching on the term magic, I hopefully will do a talk with Chris Warnock, who describes himself as an astrological magician. How about your own position in magic and astrology? Do you do talismans and things like that?
No, I mean, and this is a thing for me because outside of my official title as an astrologer, I definitely consider myself to be operating within the magical tradition because of the other things I do, QABALISTIC tarot and some of the other things that I hold near and dear to my spirituality. I mean, I've practiced with the runes as a young child as well. I dedicated myself to Odin, and so I have that as a background for my magical tradition, which isn't necessarily tied into the astrology. But I don't practice quote unquote astrological magic as a standalone practice per se, because I feel for me that the entire field of our astrology is magical. So I don't necessarily, it has never moved me to say that I practice astrological magic as a thing that we do, because I mean, every single day I use electional astrology, and that within itself is a magical practice. Every single day I'm orienting my steps and what I'm doing within the world using astrology, and that for me is a magical practice. So this other component, I'm far more interested in going outside and going by the ocean and interacting with the water element in that way, or I'm far more interested in doing something on the day of Jupiter and the hour of Jupiter when Jupiter is trining my midheaven or something. I mean, that is how I live magically with astrology. I don't really have the time or the inclination to interact with this sort of astrological magic that I know a lot of people are practicing these days. And not that, what works for people works for people, but my approach to living magically with astrology is far more organic and far more practical for me, at least.
So the experience Alistair Crowley was experiencing didn't intrigue you to follow his path, which went far into magical evocations. That was more a literary input, not something which put you on a path to become a real sort of critical black magic magician.
Well, I'm definitely not a Thelemite.
That's what okay. Okay, we know what we're talking about. Now, you said that your friends, your relatives came for a reading. When you use the term reading, did you mean chart reading or did you mean divination by tarot and astrology chart reading?
It was the two at the time.
Okay.
And the reason why it was the two at the time is because there was nothing that was actually making me feel as if they were different.
Okay.
So, and I'm very fortunate in having that upbringing. I was speaking with another colleague of mine, Rod Suskin from South Africa, who had much the same upbringing as me in that he got into tarot and astrology, and for him he grew those two things within himself at the same time, and so there wasn't really much of a difference between the two. And as a result of there not being much of a difference between the two, I had the ability to grow this very rich imaginal picture book of astrology in my mind at the same time that I was learning this tarot symbolism. And as I look to how I read charts today, a lot of the imagery and a lot of the imagery and the lore that's held within the tarot cards, it rises back up to the surface of my mind unconsciously when I'm giving a reading. And I'm so grateful for that, because I think that the other way that people learn astrology is without that. And I mean, everyone, we all have our own path, but for me, that's provided me such a rich depth of meaning and such a rich depth of connection and such a way to make astrology more relatable to people, that I would never give up that fundamental training that I had as a child of bringing those two worlds completely into my mind and allowing those two things to form at the same time. Because now today, when I do astrology, my astrology is informed by those tarot images. And when I do tarot, my tarot is informed by the astrology. So it's a completely symbiotic relationship within me. And it's created profound and powerful results within my life.
With what deck did you start in the tarot part?
I started with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck.
Okay.
And truthfully, if I'm giving a reading to someone today, I will more than likely still use that deck. That's the deck that I read for people.
Okay.
And
What manual for learning the craft did you use in those days? Did you have a book by American authors or German authors or French authors?
at the time, I was learning tarot through books like the QBL, The Bride's Reception by Freyta Akkad.
Okay.
And Freyta Akkad was one of the students of Aleister Crowley, and it's truly one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. The book starts with this statement that it is true that a great deal of rubbish has accumulated around the roots of the tree of life. And I was just so blown away by this beautiful language and the eloquence of those authors, that I looked for authors who were writing around that period. So Freyta Akkad is one of them. Israel Regardie is one of them. Kabbalistic Tarot by Robert Wang is another book that was really important for me. And I just wanted to find old books or books that spoke about tarot and the tarot astrology interlink in an old way. And so I've never been inspired to buy books that have been written within the last 50 years because I knew that there was a tradition that was far older than this. I mean, Robert Wine's book, I think, was written in the 90s, but at least he wrote it with the intention of preserving this more classical tarot information. And that's really what always inspired me.
How about Otto Wirth?
How about
Otto Wirth,
Otto Wirth?
the pupil of the French Stanislas de Guaita.
No, I think the Stanislav is the name that you just said.
Stanislas de Guaita, I believe, was his mentor.
Yeah,
he produced a book on tarot. It might have been in German. It could be. I'm not sure whether it was translated.
Well, I'm not sure. I think I know the Stanislav person's name, but I'm not sure about the first person who you mentioned.
Otto Wirth. Okay. Now let's go back to what you might tell us about your private circumstances, family. Where does your family come from? Are you one of those very rich people of the Bahamas, or where do you come from?
I come from a relatively middle-class Bahamian family, and yeah, I've always been fortunate. So I've never had a need for anything, and I've always had disposable income to buy books. My family had always held that if I got good grades in school, and if I did everything else in school correctly, I could buy any book I wanted. I could read any book I wanted. It was no concern of theirs. So my family is very Christian, very religiously Christian, but they never really stood in the way of my fundamental esoteric interests until I started to bring bad grades from school, and they thought that the bad grades was because of all of the astrology and tarot and numerology that I was doing. So they took away all of those books, and I had to only focus on school, which was very sad for me. And it was probably true. Maybe that is why my grades dropped that year. But that has always been my family's relationship to what I do. And when it started to become professional, for me, I think that they were like, we probably gave you too much latitude in terms of being your own person. But at this point in my life, my family is pretty okay in terms of me being a professional astrologer and having an astrology school and teaching yoga, and because I'm pretty successful at those things. And I think that's all a traditional Bahamian family cares about, that, you're successful. And I mean, I guess that's all any family cares about, but it's definitely something that's important to mine.
How about siblings? Do you have siblings?
I have one sibling, my sister. She is currently 20 years old, which is interesting because, I think that I viewed her as a baby up until she turned 20, and even now, she's still my baby sister. But yes, I do have one sibling.
And how old are you now?
I'm 28. I'm 20. I'm turning 29 this year.
You might be the youngest international famous astrologer in the world, right? Okay. Now to your school. I'm not familiar with the educational system on the Bahamas. Is it like in America or more like in Europe?
Europe.
And how is it when you finish? Do you finish a boarding school or public school, or how do you finish school in your country?
I attended a private school, and so I attended school up until the 10th grade.
Okay.
And I decided that I was ready to graduate. And so I asked my school if I could graduate in grade 10, because usually school goes up to grade 12. Yes. And I asked them if I could graduate in grade 10. And they said, here are the requirements. If you want to graduate in the 10th grade, here are the things you need to do. So I had to take my SATs, which is an American-based exam. I had to take my SATs in grade 10, and my GCSEs also in grade 10. And by virtue of that, they pushed me up to the 12th grade because I actually passed the exams. And so I graduated from high school 2 years earlier than I should have.
So it's called high school in your country, though?
Yes, secondary high school, yes.
Okay, so it's a normal high school diploma?
Yes. And then I went off to university.
In university means college.
Well, I think that in the Caribbean, we consider college to be different from a university, just in terms of the scope of what
Okay.
a university offers versus a
Yeah.
college. But yes, I did go off to college or university, depending on what
And now
I'm.
comes the intriguing question. You didn't study humanities or philosophy or any kind of subject which was close to your personal interest in magic and astrology and tarot. You chose public relation marketing journalism, right?
I have a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism.
How did that come about? Why did you choose that degree to study?
I studied broadcast journalism because for my family, that represented the closest thing to a real job with
Okay.
with the talents that I have. I've always done some version of public speaking within my childhood. I've always done some version of writing within my childhood, and those were things that I was known for as a child, amongst other things. And so it seemed like the logical next step that I should go off to be a writer or a speaker or something to that capacity. So I went off to university. I studied broadcast journalism and I worked on the radio. I also worked in journalism. And then after I graduated from university, I realized that I didn't really want to do any of those things. So I took my media background and I started working in marketing with a marketing firm in Jamaica. All the while, I was putting myself through university, through the money that I was making through giving readings. That's a big way of how I subsidized my university education, because my family was sending me 50 US dollars a week, which, I mean, I don't really think it's definitely not much money now, but it also wasn't much money then. So any additional money that I made that from giving readings, and I did that through my 5 years in university. And the journalism, initially I wanted to go off to school in Canada. I wanted to go off to Concordia University, and I found some of my old college applications recently, and on it, I wanted to do a, I wanted for my major to be psychology, and I wanted for my minor to be anthropology. And there was something else, it was another language subject, or I think it was dance or something. But I wanted to do a major in psychology and a minor in anthropology, which would have been far more associated with what it is I do,
Yeah.
or what it is I have done in terms of
Yes.
magic and in terms of
Yes.
astrology. But the Canadian university experience didn't happen the way that I had planned for it to happen. So I ended up going to university here in the Caribbean. I went to university in Jamaica, and journalism was really the only thing that really caught my attention.
Okay. Um, After the college degree, the university degree, that was a Bachelor of Arts,
Hmm.
and you didn't want to put a master over that.
No, because I realized that I did the journalism just because it was easy.
Okay.
And I did journalism because it didn't require any effort for me to write well, and it didn't require any effort for me to speak well. It was just a really simple thing for me, and I wasn't trying to be the world's greatest journalist. I was trying to be other things, the world's greatest of other things. And so
Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I really wanted to be a great astrologer. I really wanted to be great in the tarot that I was practicing. And at the same time, I was putting myself through dance school simultaneously, because that's
Okay.
another part of my life. And it's still a part of my life, the part of my life where I dance. And so I was trying.
When you say dance, is that a more Caribbean dancing, or is that South American dancing, or is it this European sports dancing?
I studied classical ballet. I studied classical ballet
Okay.
while I was going to university in Jamaica. I was also putting myself through dance school in another part of Jamaica. And so I studied ballet as well as modern contemporary dance, the two things together. And then when I graduated from school in Jamaica, I sent myself to dance conservatory, which is essentially the same as a dance school, but the only thing is you only do dance. There's no other subjects that you study in the conservatory. When you go to a conservatory, you're going specifically to only study that subject. So it's 6 hours of dance all day long, every day. And I went to school in Cuba for that. And I studied classical ballet as well as the Cuban modern technique at that time.
That sounds like you wanted to become a performer in a ballet context.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. I had no aspirations of becoming the world's greatest journalist, but I did have aspirations of becoming the world's greatest dancer because I think that every child studying dance has those aspirations. So that was more important to me, even though while I was in dance school, I was still doing tarot, I was still doing astrology, I was still doing all of the things and that fed me spiritually. And when I tell this story, I think people start to say, oh, you've done so many things. But for me, it doesn't feel like many things. I did the university degree because that was a mandatory thing for me to do, in the same way as we all have a mandatory job that we like to do. And I danced because that was something I was deeply passionate about. And I did astrology because that was a part of my spirituality. So for me, my life seems like anybody else's life where they have their career that they're doing because they have to do it. They have their passion that they do because they love to do it. And then they have their spirituality that feeds them deeply within. Unfortunately, I've been able to turn my spirituality, my spiritual practice into my primary career. So I never.
How did that happen? Because
Hmm?
when you were in Cuba, you were sort of on a path to become a professional dancer, right?
Hmm.
Did you? This reminds me of Peter Niehenke, the president of the German Astrological Association from 81 to 91. He was aspiring to become a world-class pianist, and when he realized that that was not going to happen, he changed his career path. Was that the same experience for you, that you realized the international first-class dancing Champions League is not where I can get to?
Well, it didn't happen for that reason. There were some other things that shifted in my life that required me to come back home to the Bahamas. And one of them was that it was expensive to be in school in Cuba studying dance and not actually making money in Cuba. As a professional dancer in Cuba, you make probably $9 a month, and
Okay.
that's working with a professional company. So the monetary benefit of studying dance and ultimately dancing in Cuba wasn't something that would allow me to sustain a living. And so I had to
Okay.
move back home to the Bahamas to support a living. And so I moved back home to the Bahamas and I entered the field of work essentially. And that was a very heartbreaking time in my life. This time of me having to drop this astrology, not the astrology rather, pardon me, but this time of having to drop the dance that I was investing so much of my life into during that time that I spent in Cuba, and having to move back home to start a quote unquote real job. And it was a tough decision to make.
What real
But
job was that?
ultimately, tell
What
me.
what real job was that?
Well, the real job was that I was still making whatever money I could make through not teaching astrology, but through practicing and giving readings. I was still
Oh,
making
okay.
but it wasn't the primary job. So I was still making whatever money I could make from that. At that moment, up until that time in my life, astrology and tarot and all of those things, they were wonderfully lucrative hobbies, pastimes, but they were still not the forefront of what I did. And luckily, I had enough clients so that I was getting really, really good. So it was, they have this. I was speaking with an astronomer recently because I'm considering, not considering, I'm actively going back to university next year to study astronomy. And I was speaking with an astronomer recently from a university in the States. And he said to me that there are really good amateur not astrologers. I didn't tell him I was an astrologer at all. He said there are really good amateur astronomers in the world who can run neck and neck with the actual astronomer who went to university and has the degree, because that just depends on a person's passion and a person's drive. And what I didn't realize at that time within my life was that I was becoming a really, really, really strong practitioner in both astrology and tarot. And it didn't occur to me. I just thought that I was giving readings how everyone gives readings. It never occurred to me how strong of a practice I was building beneath me. So I moved back home to Nassau.
When was that? When you were from Cuba back to Nassau?
From Cuba back to Nassau, I must have been 2020 at the time.
What year is that?
I can't even remember. I'm turning 29. I'm turning 29 this year.
Yeah, so that's to 2011, something like that.
2000. Your brain is better than mine. So yes, 2011.
Yeah, something like that.
Something around there.
So we are talking about a lifespan from 2011 to 2021. That's 10 years, and in that 10 years, you did achieve quite a number of things, didn't you? Now let me ask you. Beginning with books, autodidactic, self-teaching, high school, university. When did you first come in contact with the first mentor, either in yoga or in astrology or in tarot?
In yoga in Jamaica, I wasn't really the most flexible person in the world when I started dance school in Jamaica. And so I started yoga because I had found a yoga book around that same age of 12, 13. It was the book Light on Yoga. It's someplace around here. It was the book Light on Yoga by the guru of my tradition, BKS Iyengar. And it was a wonderful book, and I was like, oh, wow, there are these crazy poses in it. I didn't really have any expectations of me ever becoming an Iyengar yoga teacher at all. But I started practicing yoga in Jamaica. And in Jamaica, the yoga that is really influential there was Iyengar yoga at the time. And so I plugged into Iyengar yoga. I started doing yoga in Jamaica to be more flexible, to be a dancer, essentially. So I had this rigorous yoga background as well, because I was studying the yoga because I wanted to be a better dancer. And when I went to Cuba, at my dance school, they didn't hire me per se, but they did allow me to teach a little bit of yoga here and there to the students because they thought the movements were interesting. And I mean, there was so many things surrounding that. And so when I moved back home to the Bahamas, this opportunity fell in my lap to teach yoga. And so I was teaching yoga to celebrities, basically, and that became my entire life. And I'm very fortunate for having had that opportunity because I met some of the richest, most influential people in the world through my yoga teaching. And I think that it set me up internally to really consider, one, how fortunate I was, as well as two, what I needed my practice to look like in order to continue to associate with those people. And so I took a survey of my life and I said, is your astrology at a level where you would be willing for this person to take you somewhere with them around the world to say, this is my astrologer? Is your tarot at a level? Is your yoga at a level where this person, this multi-billionaire from Austria would be willing to take you with them and say that this is the person who I go to, this is the person who I consult with? And that experience forced me even further along the path of mastery, because I realized that I was interacting with some of the best people in their fields around the world. Literally the wealthiest people on the planet were my clients to teach yoga to. And I saw the things that were meaningful to them, and excellence was meaningful to them. The best and associating with the best was meaningful to them. And so for that reason, it forced me to take a survey of my life and say, well, hey, Mychal, are you actually excellent at what you do? Within the range of your abilities, are you really being the best at what you can do? And while it doesn't seem directly related to my astrology, it completely impacted my astrology because I needed to be able to do something that wasn't being done, or I needed to be able to demonstrate astrology in a real and a tangible way, which is why a lot of the work I do today is caught up within this concept of blind chart readings, because the blind chart reading is essentially astrology with no protection. Basically, it's someone submits their chart cold, no background information, and I read the chart for an hour, for 2 hours, for however long. And essentially, every time I do a blind chart reading, I'm putting my entire reputation on the line, because you can either be right or wrong in a circumstance like that. And I do that, and that's something that I'm known for, and that's something that people look to me for, because it's something that I do very well. And that, as I look back on my life and who I've worked with and how I've worked with them in terms of some of my wealthy clients, I realized that that's the reason why I probably went into the blind chart reading thing, because this blind chart reading concept for me represents what astrology is on its own terms, not by knowing something about the client, but just knowing astrology very, very well. And that those two things are related for me.
You do realize that most modern astrologers would have their hair on fire right now. You must have. I was trained in modern astrology, and I was starting the tradition astrology last year. We have a famous author in Germany, Thomas Ring, who was talking about the borders, the boundaries of delineation, and he would have the hair on fire, for example, because he was believing that the manifestation of the chart is on so different and possible levels that you need more information to do a chart reading. So I would think that your ability to do that blind chart reading is not possible to learn. That is something you brought with you when you were born. Would you agree?
No. because I'm a very pragmatic Saturnian person.
Okay.
And if a thing is going to work, it should work based on its own standards. And truthfully, I do not believe that blind chart reading is an appropriate way to work with clients.
Okay.
And I always have to clarify this for people. I do not believe that blind chart reading is an appropriate way to work with clients. If you're a counseling astrologer, consulting astrologer, no, that is not the appropriate way to do that. However, this ability to blind read a chart is a standalone practice that an astrologer should have. I mean, we get paid to do astrology, which means that within ourselves, there should be something within our ability that allows us to interpret that chart on its own basis without having somebody else's background attached. And of course, culture makes a difference, background makes a difference, socioeconomic upbringing makes a difference, spirituality makes a difference. All of these other things that form a person culturally within the world makes a difference in terms of how they're able to manifest the promise that is within their natal chart. However, that chart still has the ability to say something about the nature of that person that will still ring true, even if you don't know everything about their cultural, socioeconomic, and those backgrounds over there. So for me, that ability must be teachable. And it's something that I teach. I teach my students at Oraculos this all the time. And I also run a masterclass every Sunday, and I teach people how to do exactly the same thing. And just last night, I was reading a lady's chart, no information. I didn't even know that it was her chart because it was a full class. And so in the master class, there's a full class of people. They all submit their chart to my assistant who you would have been speaking with, Sam. And then he gives me one of the charts randomly. So I don't know who the chart belongs to at all. And so I don't know if it's somebody in the class or somebody who the person knows or whatever. And last night at the end of the reading, I was quickly wrapping up the reading. And I said, oh, and by the way, your father was unavailable to you. Your father was absent during your life, and your mother was the more important figure within your life. But however, because your father not being there, your mother ended up also being inaccessible, even though she was the only parent that you had access to. And that was within the chart of this person, not knowing the person, not knowing who she was, her background. And then she said that it was her chart, one of the 20 people in the class. And I was shocked because I didn't know that people submitted their own chart. But then she said that last piece was absolutely right. The father died at 7 years old. The mother was the only parent who she had left. But because of the father's death, or related to the father's death, the mother was mentally institutionalized for her entire childhood. So while the mother was the only parent who she had left, the mother was consistently inaccessible and unavailable to her. And the same thing that I said to her in the chart was the same thing that she ended repeating back. I'm a very practical person, and this astrology needs to have a concrete manifestation in the world.
Okay,
Period.
let's make a survey. You are familiar with a lot of astrology communities in different countries. I would guess in all the Western Hemisphere astrology communities, either traditional or modern or whatever, people being able to do what you just did, not more than 5%. Would you agree?
I agree.
Okay. Now, how about your teaching? When you teach people, students, how often do you experience a student who comes close to your personal ability? Is that only 5% of the students, or is that more?
Once again, and so just stepping back 1 second, the astrologers who I have personally associated with are astrologers who have passed the blind chart reading test for me.
Okay.
And that is my only test in terms of, if I'm going to pay someone to be my mentor, I need to see that that person can use astrology better than me. And so the people who I have paid, and who I have, because I paid everyone I've studied with, the people who I paid to mentor me are people who have been able to do this exact same thing.
Okay.
Well, probably not the exact, because I mean, there's still,
Yes, okay.
different people of different whatever.
So that is sort of a filter for yourself with whom you coordinate yourself, right?
It is. So as I think back, Lee Lehman is someone who I studied with for a very long time. And Lee Lehman has consistently been able to prove this skill to me, which is why I've studied with Lee Lehman.
So let's wrap this up with the other mentors. What other mentors did you have? Lee Lehman, I know. Which other
Lee Lehman, Judith Hill, who's a very popular astrologer in America, and I dare say around the world as well. Judith Hill, Christine Skinner, who is a very modern astrologer, but she's good at what she does. She's extraordinarily good. Gary Kristen, Faith McInerney, Mira Epstein. I've gone to different people for different things, essentially. Nicholas Smuts Alsop, who's a fertility astrologer, a medieval fertility astrologer. I've gone to Nikki to get her perspective on fertility astrology. So I've gone to people who have specific abilities that I've wanted to learn from. But at the end of the day, the test for all of them has been the exact same test.
Okay.
Can you read this chart?
Okay. We are talking about a lot of investment by time, and we are also talking about a lot of investment in money. Definitely. If you would start with 12 years old, buying books, then later on being mentored by people which you have to pay because they wouldn't mentor you, because that's their business model. Are we talking about more than $100,000?
We're talking about more than $100,000. I have, and I don't want to I'll say this much, but we are talking about more than $100,000. And I know for a fact that at least one of my mentors has made in excess of $20,000 from me.
So basically, we agree that this is not the normal way for normal people to become a professional astrologer. Okay. Now, did I understand that right? When you came back from Cuba, from the dance school, and started the normal job, the front job was the yoga teaching, right?
The yoga practice. The yoga teaching, yes.
The yoga practice. Now, I think it's time to use the computer again to give an overview of what people can find with you. let's start with a short overview here. You are a certified professional astrologer, certified by CSH is Lee Lehman, right?
So the NCGR PAA, that in America is the National Council for Geocosmic Research.
Okay.
And so I'm certified through the NCGR, and the CSH is from Lee Lehman. That means Classical Studies in Horary Astrology 2. That's the advanced certification that she offers in Horary Astrology. So those are my astrological credentials.
And then in the third line, we have practice in Renaissance and Uranian astrology. Now, Renaissance astrology is a broad term. What sort of Renaissance astrologer are you? I give you to choose. Are you a Lily astrologer? Are you a Morinus astrologer? Are you a Gardano astrologer? Or are you, let's take Bonatti into the Renaissance, are you a Bonatti astrologer? What sort of Renaissance astrologer are you?
Well, when we say Bonatti, within my mind, I place Bonatti squarely in the medieval period. So,
Okay.
so for me, as far as periods go, Bonatti is really medieval.
Okay.
And I am a classical astrologer, period. And when I look at one of the difficulties that I've had, and so I'll get to your question, because I definitely have emphasized a lot of my work on the 17th century, and I also have studied extensively, and I teach the work of Jean-Baptiste Morin, particularly book 21, his book on horoscopic delineation, is something that I teach heavily from within the second year of my program that I teach at Oraculos. But the distinctions between the different periods of classical astrology, I realize that it's important for some people because that's what they make their name from. So maybe they're a Hellenistic astrologer and that's how they make their name, or maybe they're a medieval astrologer and that's how they make their name, or maybe they're a Renaissance astrologer and that's how they make their name. But for me, I practice classical astrology, and I've never needed in the past to say, oh, I read Manilius because I find Manilius's Astronomica to be beautiful and it's made me cry and it really moves my heart. Or I love reading Paulus Alexandrinus and the commentary by Olympiodorus. And I've never had to go into all of these things because I don't really need to let people know that I've studied Hellenistic astrology as well, because for me, that's just classical astrology. It doesn't need to be called Hellenistic because it's just classical. And so, I mean, for me, that is the broad scope of my astrology. I love Manilius. I love Paulus Alexandrinus. I love Dorotheus. I love Vatius Valens. I love Ptolemy. I just coming down. I love astrologers from the medieval period because I find the singular thread of astrology that they all hold within themselves. And so when I say that I'm a Renaissance astrologer, I mean, I am all of that. Plus this that I am, which is essentially a practitioner of this astrology that was codified within the 17th century. But I love Abraham Ibn Ezra as well. I've interviewed Shlomo Sela, who's one of the commentators.
But that begs the question. Morat de Villefranche, more than Lily, threw out a lot of practices because he didn't deem them worthy to keep them. How do you bridge that problem that Morat de Villefranche is very good in synthesizing and doing the rulership thing, but he threw out the decans, he threw out the duplicities, he threw out the essential dignities, I believe. He threw out all the things you need for the old classical astrology. Now, what do you practice? Do you reintegrate the decans, the phases, the terms, the bounds? I suppose I suppose Egyptian bounds you use, don't you?
I do not use Egyptian bounds.
Oh, which one do you use? The Chaldean or the Ptolemaic?
I most assuredly use Ptolemaic bounds, which has brought me no amount of respect in the traditional astrology community.
I can understand that. You are sort of a traditional heretic.
I am. I most definitely am. So it's brought me no amount of respect in the traditional astrology community, and I really don't care either, truthfully, because I'm less concerned with people who I realize that what I do with astrology and my use of astrology and how I use astrology and how I demonstrate the truth of astrology and the reality of astrology is a far different contribution to this field than I see many other of my traditional astrology colleagues doing. Like I say, every time I give a public demonstration or a public lecture or a public whatever of a chart reading, I put my reputation on the line each and every time. And if I didn't have that childhood background in esotericism, mysticism, astrology, all of these things, if I didn't jump over that doubt in my childhood already, then I would have come into astrology as an adult with these doubts. Oh, maybe it doesn't work. You know, when I started doing the blind chart readings, of a very famous colleague of mine, world famous colleague, said to me, Michael, why are you doing that? You know, aren't you afraid you'll aren't you afraid
most astrologers would extremely be afraid because they can't do it. Let's be clear about that.
So yes, this friend of mine was like, Michael, aren't you afraid you'll get it wrong? I was like, why aren't more people doing this? And this person said to me, aren't you afraid you'll get it wrong? Aren't you afraid to screw it up or whatever? And the only time in which that fear was ever in my heart was after that person said that to me. When I started to think, oh, maybe I am doing something wrong or too risky or whatever the case is. But I don't have that as a fear. I don't come into this practice with those fears. I come into this practice with experience and with real world, tangibilized experience that bears tangible fruit. So I use the Ptolemaic terms because when I speak to someone about the term of their ascendant, based on whatever planet it is in, that term of the ascendant, it makes sense for them within the context of their lives. Last night, when I spoke to the lady about how she has the term of Venus rising, because in the Ptolemaic terms, 15 degrees of Scorpio is in the middle of Venus, because in Scorpio, Mars rules up until 6 degrees and Jupiter rules up until 14 degrees and Venus rules up until 21 degrees. And I said to her, hey, you have the term of Venus rising. So on top of everything else, I said, you may be interested in art and poetry may be how you express yourself primarily, because you also have Mercury conjunct that Venus and they're both in Libra. And this is the term of Venus. And when I said that rang true to her completely, because that is how she expresses herself.
Okay. Now,
in saying all that, to say that I have proven why I use the terms that I use, and I do not know whether or not my traditional colleagues have proven for themselves why they use the terms that they use.
I'm going to another point.
Mm-hmm.
At the moment, I'm trying to establish a scientific project on bias control and delineation. Let's take these Ptolemy terms. Did you ever sort of find time to do some research how the results would have been if you would have chosen to do the Egyptians or the Chaldean with the same chart? Did you ever do some scientific research on that?
Once again, I am as Saturnian as they come. And for me, what that means is if it's not broken, it needs no fixing.
Oh, okay, I understand. Okay, so you are not curious as I am as a Sagittarius, not so much a Saturnian type. I'm more a Jupiterian type. I have Jupiter 7 times in my chart, I believe. Okay, so Saturn and Mercury, you're Saturn Mercury more or less. I learned in one of your videos. Okay, so the approach, check yourself with scientific methods, is not your cup of tea, right?
Well, pause. No, because remember I said that next year I'm going to school to study astronomy. So I'm
okay.
And at the moment I'm studying. I have to study lots of pre-astronomy courses in order to do the PhD program I'm wanting to do. So, and I'm also very Jupiterian as well. I can be very Jupiterian. So I know the Jupiterian dilemma of wanting to know everything in order to find the path towards knowing one thing. And this for me has been a struggle within my earlier life that I don't find so much being a struggle now. If someone last night asked me the question, I after I did this wonderful, truly astounding reading for this person, someone in the audience said, would that reading have still have been accurate if you didn't use Neptune? because because this lady had Neptune rising as well. And as soon as the person asked that question, I automatically knew exactly where this person was coming from. And it was so mind-numbing for me. It's so mind-numbing for me when I hear my colleagues, they can sit down and hear a world-class reading, out of this world phenomenal. And at the end, their concern is that you used Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Those people, I don't keep in my life, because those people are far more concerned with disproving something than they are concerned with acknowledging when and if that thing works. So the person went on to say, yes, aren't you concerned, suppose we didn't use that Neptune over there. Suppose that Neptune in this person's chart was someplace else. And my response to him was, everything in our chart could potentially be someplace else, but it's not. Because our astrology is based on this concept that the chart at that exact moment in time is the exact chart to reflect exactly who you are coming into this world. So anything could be anywhere, but it's not. And that is the basis of our astrology. And so I listened to him wring his hands and try to get me. And this is what I hate. And I hate this particularly with traditional astrology. I don't find it anywhere else. I find this only amongst traditional astrologers. I absolutely detest this habit within a lot of traditional astrologers to need to not only wring their hands to figure out if they could find another way of doing it without Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and then trying to force that on you and say, now that I have made this my problem, this must also be your problem. And you, since you call yourself a traditional astrologer, Mychal Bryan, you need to go figure out how you would have found that same information without using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. I have neither the time nor the inclination for this, because I've given how many thousands of readings to know that Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto work. I do not need to take on somebody else's burden who chooses not to use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. That is that person's life to live. Leave me out of your process.
That gives me a possibility to ask a special question about Sue Ward and her book about how the outer planets became their attributes. Did you have a special input which attributes you find valid and which you push aside because they were just invented by Alan Leo and it wasn't really worth it reading him? Now, how did you find a way to solve that problem that the outer planets got their attributes either by crystal reading or tea leaf reading or whatever, but not real research? How did you do that for yourself? How do you find what is Uranus, what is Neptune, what is Pluto, what are their capacities and what are not their capacities? Did you find a way to do that?
That's pardon me. That's a wonderful question. And a part of that is because, once again, a lot of my astrological reading is pre-Alan Leo. So I have seen and I have read books by the likes of W.J. Simonite and Stella Rupertus and Raphael, and people who, I believe that Raphael was also pre-Alan Leo. I could be mistaken, but the book in question that I'm thinking about was written in the year 1828 by Raphael. So I think that's pre-Alan.
Oh, that's very much pre-Alan Leo.
Right, because Alan Leo was early 20th.
Yes.
But what am I saying about this? What I'm saying about it is that I saw that languaging of Uranus evolve from the earliest discoveries of Uranus through time up until the end of the 19th century. Similarly, I saw the language of Neptune evolve from the discovery of Neptune up until the end of the 19th century. So I saw how astrologers were thinking about those outer planets, and I saw which astrologers began to say, and maybe Uranus has something to do with Aquarius because XYZ. That I think the first instance of that was in 1828 in Raphael in his Manual of Astrology. And so I saw this trickling in of this other concept of the outer planets as rulership. And I saw how earlier astrologers said these planets don't rule anything, but yet they are still important.
Okay.
Charles Carter, similarly said the same thing in one of his early astrological writings, that these outer planets don't necessarily rule anything, but yet they are still of great impact and importance within the
What's
chart.
your position? Do they rule or don't they rule?
I'm traditional to the bone. I would never say that Uranus ruled anything or Neptune ruled anything or Pluto ruled anything, but are they important?
Yes,
Do
okay.
they have impact?
And second question, do you use them as a species sui generis, or do you use them like fixed stars, like some people do?
This concept of using the outer planets as fixed stars, a dear friend of mine, John Frawley, I interviewed him, and John.
Yes, I recommend the interview. It's very, very interesting. Yeah.
And John said this thing of, I think John may have mentioned this thing of using the outer planets as fixed stars, and love John, respect everything that he does. That's not how I use.
Okay, so that means it's a category by itself.
I mean, for me, an outer planet becomes important if it's conjunct your ascendant. If you have Uranus, parallel or contraparallel your ascendant, it shows up within your environment. If you have Pluto parallel or contraparallel your midheaven, it shows up within how you manifest yourself within the world. If you have your chart ruler conjunct Uranus,
so we are talking about the outer planets only in conjunction with the angles.
We're talking, well, I mean, insofar as you're asking specifically about the outer planets and how I use them.
Yeah.
And how I use them, I know that I'm also not singular in this approach. My other colleagues, Deb Holding being one of them, who runs one of the most popular schools of traditional astrology, Lee Lehman as well, John Frawley as well, Mira Epstein as well, Robert Hand as well, Robert Zoller's first book on the Arabic parts, tools for a lost method of prediction. Robert Zoller was also using the outer planets. So I think that it's a very, very arrogant stance.
No, we are on the same line. No.
I don't mean you.
I was just wondering another thing. I believe still today there is no book written and in print available with your approach. Is that correct?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know that I've seen Lee do it anecdotally, and I know that I may have listened to a Deb Holding lecture once where she.
So somebody has to write this manual.
Someone is having to write this book, and it requires a lot of knowledge to write a book like that, because it requires a deeply rigorous understanding of traditional astrology. And it requires the willingness to use those outer planets to see how they manifest within people's lives. For example, I'm working on a project at the moment, on a research project, and it's about Moon Chiron. I've been forced, despite my best interests and despite my own hesitations, I have been forced, beyond the shadow of a doubt, to acknowledge Chiron within the charts that I use these days. It is a recent development. It happened only in the last 3 years. I have felt completely forced and on my knees to use Chiron. And the reason for that is because every chart I've seen in the past 3 years in which a person has had a Moon Chiron opposition or a Moon Chiron conjunction, or even the Moon Chiron semi-square or sesquiquadrate, those people have all said the same thing to me. And the thing has been, My mother was a psycho. My mother was mentally unstable. My mother locked herself in her bedroom and told me and my little sister that she was going to kill herself. My mother was manipulative. My mother was institutionalized. My mother was on drugs. My all of these things having to do with the broken or essentially the Chironian wounded story of the mother, but not just any Chironian story of the mother, the fundamental mental instability of the mother has shown up time and time and time and time again when I see a Moon Chiron. I said this anecdotally in a lecture I recently gave. It wasn't even about Moon Chiron. Someone was asking me what I found interesting astrologically, and I mentioned Moon Chiron, and I mentioned some of the things that I had noticed about Moon Chiron. And three of the people in the audience who have Moon Chiron said, "Yep, that's my mother exactly."
Okay.
Moon Chiron, me, traditional astrologer, traditional to the bone. I sleep next to Manilius every single night. I read Paulus Alexandrinus to go to bed. I pore over books from the 17th century. I have Ibn Ezra right here next to me. Me, traditional astrologer, being drawn into this Chiron story because it works. It works. It has been working and it's validated itself.
And it's not the only thing which you have been drawn to, because on this special site, the viewers can find a lot of literature which you seem to be reading in the original language. Is that right? Hamburg School in the original, is that your approach?
So I have next to me, my three books that I just received from my dear friend Mychal Feist, and this is
Mychal Feist is the grandson of Ludwig Rudolf, right?
Ludwig Rudolph. Yes,
Yeah.
he's Udo Rudolph's
Nephew, I believe. Yeah.
nephew. Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah, I've known Udo Rudolph myself personally, and
Uh,
Mychal Feist had a lot of difficult times to establish himself as the heir of the tradition. There was a lot of trouble going on. So for the viewers, we won't go into all these books. These are all the books Mychal
mhm,
might have on his shelf in the
mhm.
original or will be buying someday. Now, I personally have some training in the Hamburg school, and it's called Uranian school in the English-speaking world. What
Mhm.
on earth brought you into the Hamburg school?
Well, I wanted to show you that this is what I just got. This is Leitfaden der Astrologie.
Yeah, Ludwig Rudolph, yes.
And then
Yeah,
this is
just to counter that, I have this book on my table at the
I,
moment. That's the
I,
same one.
I have Dimension. I have Dimension as well. And I
Yeah.
also got a couple copies of the most recent Hamburger
Yes.
Heftes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Hamburger Hefte. That's very specific studying for somebody like you in the Bahamas. Now,
Yes.
question again: what on earth draw you into that circle?
Robert Hand has this book called I think it's horoscope symbols. And
Okay.
in that book, Horoscope Symbols, there's a section in which he goes into Uranian astrology and cosmobiology, because at the time Robert Hand was a cosmobiologist, which
The Aberdeen School, you mean?
the Aberdeen
Yeah.
school,
Okay.
yes. And and I opened the book, I saw that, and like many people, I flipped straight past that page because I couldn't understand that. It looked completely strange. The 90-degree dial looks like a completely foreign animal.
Yes.
It doesn't look normal,
Yes.
basically. And so I flipped straight past it. And then a few years later, I started to hear about midpoints as a thing by themselves. Midpoints. And midpoints were far easier for me to sink my teeth into
Okay.
than the 90-degree dial.
Okay.
And so I didn't automatically make the correlation between
Did you speak German at that time?
I didn't speak German at the time. At the moment, I'm studying German. One of my students at
Oh, okay.
Oraculos, one of my students, Barbara, she's in Hamburg, and she's an English teacher. She's from Hamburg, so she's a German from Hamburg, and she
Mother tongue
teaches.
is German.
Her
Okay.
mother tongue is
Yeah.
German,
Okay.
and she teaches English to her German students. And So she teaches me German. She teaches me
And that is
German.
why you can read a not so easy to read book like this one, because this book he just showed, these are articles from
Yes,
Alfred Witte from 1913 onwards, and that is heavy stuff. That is really heavy stuff.
it is. And I will not say that I am completely a pro at reading this at all, but our agreement is that she teaches me German. She gets me to the height of German language so that I can read these books in my sleep, and I teach her how to be a professional astrologer, and that's a wonderful agreement that the two of us have between each other, and it's working. I love it very much because I love whenever I wanted to learn something, I've always thrown myself into that language. So when I wanted to study dance in Cuba, I threw myself into Spanish, and therefore I studied dance in Cuba. But going back to your going back to the topic about what got me into what is this now?
Methodik der astrologischen Häuser und Planetenbilder. It's one of the books you might have
Yes, I
already
have
bought.
that.
I brought this homepage up because I see that in a few weeks you will speak German enough to go to this German publisher, Alfred Stiele in Tübingen, and you get to know that in Germany you can buy a lot more books than just the Witte books. It's an
Wow.
unbelievable large assortment of German books. Anybody who can read German and wants to know about the German sphere of astrology books, old and new ones, modern astrologers, old astrologers, Erik van Sloten, the traditional oraries, all here. So for the people who can read German, that's the place to
Wow.
go. Astronova in Tübingen, and it's on the subside of this talk. Okay, we won't dig into the Hamburg school because then we need another 3 hours at least to talk about that. But let's go back to your oversight, what you have been in your life,
Mhm.
and that was up here on the beginning of this talk. You see, I prepared quite a lot of things for this talk today. Now, this one, we have covered the practice of Renaissance and Uranian astrology. You have been mentored by the astrologer and you spent quite an amount of money. And now we're coming to Mnemonists, memory athlete trained by memory grandmaster and world record holder Kevin Horsley. How important is that for you?
So the word is mnemonist. It's kind of like mnemonic
Okay.
techniques, that
Okay.
term mnemonic techniques that you use to like remember stuff in school. So that is very important for me, and I teach that at Oraculos as well because I have the entire table of essential dignities memorized, and there's
Are
a
you the
lot of.
only astrologer in the world who can do that?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the only one in the world who has that, but I do remember going to a Robert Hand lecture in 2018 at the United Astrology Conference, where he said you just pull up your essential dignities table in your software. So you don't memorize this. And he specifically made a point of saying you don't memorize this. You just pull up your table. And I also remember in 1995, Robert Hand was giving a presentation in Mexico on essential dignities, and he said the same thing then. So it was same as if from
So
1995
you
to
are the contradiction to Robert Hand. Okay.
so thank you, Robert Hahn, because it was only because he said that no one has ever memorized this why I wanted to find ways to memorize it because he said that statement.
Okay.
So yes, I'm a mnemonist, and that's a very important thing for me. Every day I memorize two decks two decks of playing cards, and I do that in at the moment my memorization time is about 2 minutes and 6 seconds for me to memorize one deck of cards. Is it takes me 2 minutes and 6 seconds to memorize it, about 6 minutes to recall it, and that's my daily memory training essentially. And used astrologically, I teach my students how to memorize the triplicity rulers and how to memorize the antisha and the contra antisha and how to memorize the essential dignities table because I believe that astrologers of today should be able to use their mind in much the same way as astrologers of old. And for me, I can't imagine someone like Abraham Ibn Ezra having his essential dignities table in the top pocket of his robe in
Yeah.
in ancient Spain or something. So because I know that astrologers before did it, I force my students to do it today. And I say force with, lightly, because once I teach them the techniques, they memorize it just as well as I do.
So
And so
basically,
that's
one could say a 28-year-old astrologer on the Bahamas is starting a new school tradition, which begs the question to found a school, to make the foundation for a new school tradition, for a new way of looking at things. You need a couple of students. About how many students are we talking? Your courses are 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 30, 50 in a class. How large are your student groups?
collectively at this moment, with the students who are enrolled in my full 2-year program, as well as the students who are part of the open campus, because my open campus is the master classes that I offer. So I have the actual 2-year program that people enroll in, and then I have the open campus, the open school that I teach on Sunday evenings. I would say that we have 60 students enrolled collectively, the open campus having about 20 students in it, and the beginners course, the first semester, the first year students, there are 25 students in that course. And then the second semester students, there are about 18 students in that course. So collectively, it's roughly about 60 students in total.
So basically, you are 28 now. If you do this for another 40 years, you will have changed the scene, right?
That is my hope. Once again, as a very Saturnian person, death is never too far from my mind. And so I'm always thinking, what will my impact be on this community when I die? What would I have given to this astrology community? And if I leave, one of the things that, there are many things I highly dislike. I was going to say there are many things I hate, because I'm not afraid of using the hate word, but there are many things I highly dislike. And one of them is an astrologer who has mastered, or who has attained some level of mastery within their field, who dies without passing that knowledge on.
So
I think that is,
that means at least on one day your course material must be published as books, right?
we're working on them, but
Okay.
one of the greatest astrologers who I've ever worked with, when I asked him, why don't you have this stuff published?
Yes.
He, he said to me, because the people who are publishing all the books aren't necessarily the best astrologers.
Oh, that's
because
true.
because the best astrologers are the ones who are in the trenches, working with their clients, working with their students day in and day out. They're working there. Those of us who have attained some level of depth of insight, or who have attained some level of technical mastery within this field, are too busy practicing and too busy studying and cross-referencing and experimenting and practicing some more to sit down and actually publish a book. And while there are amazing books published, don't get me wrong, there are amazing books by amazing astrologers published. For the most part, the people who I know, who I consider to be the greatest astrologers in the West, because I can't speak about India. I mean, I have studied Vedic astrology as well, but that's a completely different thing. But the people who I consider to be the greatest astrologers in the West are unpublished.
Now let's go back to your great Ptolemy approach. He was not practicing astrology. Vettius Valens was. Why don't you put Vettius Valens on the pedestal and throw Ptolemy to the side?
Because
Going along with your argument.
well, you're very correct in that sense. What I find in Ptolemy that I really enjoy is something I find in Abraham ibn Ezra, and it is something that a tradition that has been lost greatly within the West, and that tradition is explaining why things are the way they are.
Okay.
The why, the reason
Yeah,
behind
that's
things.
not violence. That's Ptolemy. I agree on that. Yeah, and
Yeah,
even Ezra especially.
Ibn
Okay,
Ezra as
we,
well.
we won't dig too much into that. Let's go back to your rather impressive what you are all doing. Okay, we didn't talk about hypnosis. How
Right.
important is first? What education did you get into hypnotherapy? And what did you do with your education? Did you have patients, or what else did you do with the methods? And in what
I
tradition do you go back to Janet and then all these old Charcot and all those people? Or,
Anton Mesmer, no.
yes, do you how far back did you go in your training, and what is this for you, and what sort of education did you get into this in this?
I have a diploma from the Hypnotherapy Institute, which is located in San Francisco, California,
Okay,
and specifically Corte Madera, which is just outside of San Francisco in California. And I became a hypnotherapist so that I could have more counseling skills as an astrologer.
okay,
So my hypnotherapy training was meant to support my astrology training, because there was a moment that I came upon the realization that I'm really, really, really good as an astrologer. I don't feel any lack within my interpretive abilities and my delineation ability as an astrologer, but where I feel the lack is in the counseling component and in the human component. And I didn't want to learn that from psychological astrology, because I felt as if the school of psychological astrology took that in a direction that I wasn't interested in. Astrology for me is astrology. Let me know my astrology. And I don't,
okay.
that's just what it is. But if I'm going to seek out counseling skills, I'm going to go someplace that I can actually get those skills from. So I studied hypnotherapy I have a diploma in hypnotherapy from the Hypnotherapy Institute in Corte Madera. And so I'm a practicing
So you don't
hypnotherapist.
you don't see patients.
At the moment, no, particularly because of COVID, but I did before
Oh, you
COVID.
did. You did do patient work, which is not astrological work. It's medicine work.
Precisely.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Do you intend to go back to patient work?
I am very much concerned with dream work.
Okay,
And so working with people with their dreams is a
okay,
very important part of my practice. And it's a big part of what I teach at Oraculos as well, because we in astrology we have a tradition of astrological dream work as well. And I I have a lucid dreaming practice, and I've always had a lucid dreaming practice as a child. I follow a lucid dreaming technique, which allows me
okay,
to have lucid dreams. And that's something I teach my students at Oraculos, because I'm wanting to do a wide sweeping research project on astrological dream work. So the techniques that we have for astrological dream work today from the medieval period are techniques for if you randomly happen to have a dream, here's how you can interpret that dream. But what
okay.
about but what about the person who can dream on will every night? What techniques do we have to accommodate those people with those dreams? And to my knowledge, this school, Oraculos, my school, Oraculos, is the only school where we have done this sort of research project in such a large and sweeping way,
Okay.
where all of the students at Oraculos have a lucid dreaming practice.
Um, Now we are touching on dream work, and there are two names coming up. Okay, Freud and Jung. More the Freudian or more the Jungian approach?
More the Jungian, and I mean
Okay,
more
okay,
the
okay. That's good enough for me. I don't need the details because I'm a Jungian. I have all the Jungian literature on this side of my board. But I want to come to a special question. If you're doing Jungian dream work, did you get the red book?
I have the red book. I have a copy of
Okay,
the red
okay.
book, and
Just we are talking like insiders. The other people have to look all that up because that would take a day to talk. Okay, you have the red book. Then we are talking about archetypal experience in a person.
Mhm.
First question: did you try to repeat his experiment, which is very dangerous?
I didn't try to repeat Jung's experiments at all, in the same way that, I read Crowley, but I had no
Yeah.
I had no desire to
Okay.
lock myself in my room and
Okay, that's
repeat.
good enough for me. So time is running out. Second question: the archetypes in the Jungian dream work and in the Jung literature are very essential point of looking at things. And considering that you integrate the outer planets, how do you integrate the approach of Jung to archetypes, which are there? They are really manifestations of reality. Do you integrate the reality of archetypes in your chart reading practice?
No.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because I I don't practice Jungian astrology, and so
Yes,
I
I
keep
understand that. Yeah.
right. So I keep those two things separate. But at the moment, what we're doing at Oraculos, which is really special, is all of our students, all 40 of the students who are enrolled in the first year or the second year program, they record their dreams every night,
Okay.
and they record the exact time that they wake up and write that dream down, the date, and the location. And with time, date, and location, we have charts for all of those dreams,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
which means at the end of the semester, we have hundreds of dreams that have been well timed, well recorded, well dated, well locationed, and we have people who have the ability to recall massive amounts of information from their dreams that a normal dreamer wouldn't. So ultimately, we'll do a much more specific research project with this, but at least right now we're cultivating the dreams themselves.
Okay, we have covered quite a lot of areas. The 28-year-old master of things is doing his work. Just you click on this one, then you get the yoga side. If you click on this, you get the oracular side. If you click on this, you get a little bit more of biography. Then you have all the home pages here to click on. We won't talk about your year you got granted because you got pierced. Is that right? We won't have time for that. We have the blind chart reading, the school, the podcast. Let me ask you one specific question. Do you use Cassini? Because today we have a combust Venus and it's going into Cassini in the next days. Do you use that perspective of astrology?
Most definitely. I use all of the solar conditions because all of the solar conditions are a part of our medieval tradition as well as a part of our Renaissance tradition. So yes, I do use all of the solar conditions as well.
Okay, now combust and Cassini. One tradition says Venus is combust today and she goes into Cassini and she comes out strengthened. Do you use that theory?
Well, combustion, astrologically speaking, is one of the worst things that can happen to a planet. So, for example, today we have the sun at 2 degrees Aries and Venus is at 1 degree Aries. Venus right now is combust.
Yes.
Because the range of Cazimi is really just 17 minutes, or some people say 18 minutes.
Yes.
But that's the range of Cazimi. So at the moment, Venus is combust. She's moving into the heart of the sun, and she will be in Cazimi when she is in that oasis that is 17 minutes.
Yes.
Before or after or within the sun. But after that, she goes back to being combust. And combustion is truly one of the most debilitating things that can happen to.
So you are not following the theory that after Cassini she stays strengthened. That's not your point of view.
It's definitely not. And the reason for that is because combustion is an astronomical occurrence. And what that means is that you cannot see that Venus. It's as if that Venus has been completely swallowed into the body because of into the body of the sun because of the radiance of the sun. So insofar as that planet has been completely swallowed by the sun, Betham in the Santiloquium says that a planet combust is like a man in prison without hope of a planet combust is like a man in prison without hope of release from his captivity. So when you're combust, everything about you as a planet has been completely given over to the sun because the sun is, to be combust means to be unseen. You're unseen, and you're unseen until you withdraw from that sun by at least about 17 degrees. Then it's said that you've removed yourself from the rays of the sun. You're You're no longer under the beams of the sun, essentially. So no planet is really strong when it's combust. Not even Mars. I know that there's a big argument as to whether or not Mars can be combust because Mars is hot and dry and so similar to the sun already. But even Mars is having to pay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar when Mars is combust.
So let's go back to the computer. We won't go into the Orbs of Influence, a very interesting paper by Stephen Birchfield. We won't go into all the other things we have here because time is running out. So we go for the last question. The future is a PhD in astronomy. Mm-hmm. Why do you need a PhD in astronomy?
Because every great astrologer before the 20th century also had a rigorous astronomical background. And I know this because I've read a lot of those books. And as I look back on books from the 17th century and earlier, you always see John Gadbury, polymath, expert of astrology, astronomy, and physics, or Nicholas Culpeper, polymath, expert of astronomy, astrology, and physics, or Christopher Hayden, same thing, astronomy, astrology, and physics, which means that these people were experts and masters of astronomy, astrology, and medicine. Today, this generation of astrologers, and by this generation, I'm referring to the last 100 years, this generation of astrologers has something peculiar insofar as we are the only generation of astrologers who can claim to have an astrological practice without ever going outside and looking up at the sky once. This is unheard of within our craft. It is unheard of that the astrologer is not also having a deep and a rigorous background in astronomy. Even as late as Raphael, I'm reading Raphael now, his book, The Manual of Astrology from 1828. Even Raphael is having this deeply rigorous understanding of astronomy and what is a star of a first magnitude versus a star of a second magnitude, and what is the distance between things, and what is gravity, and all of these wonderful things. Raphael, an astrologer, is still having this deeply rigorous astronomical understanding. Last week, when I was speaking with the astronomer as a point of advisement as to whether or not I should be studying astronomy at all, he kind of tested me. And he said, Mychal, I'm really surprised by the amount of technical astronomical information that you know. And one, I didn't tell him I was an astrologer. Obviously, I would never.
Not so good an idea.
not so good an idea. But you know, as I've inherited a lot of books from my grandfather. My grandfather was an Anglican priest who was also a professional astronomer. I know this because I have his old books from school and his old notes from school. And he also studied astrology. And I know this because I collected many of the astrology books that I have. I collected those from his old library. And I've recently found all of this out within the last 3 years or so, that he studied astronomy. He was an Anglican priest, but he was also studying esotericism and astrology specifically around the years that I was born. And so all of this feels to me like I'm doing, so as I look at my life, and when I hear people say, oh, you know, Mychal, I listen to you talk and you sound like a preacher or like a priest sometimes when you're speaking. And when I hear that, and I know what his history has been, it makes me feel as if I'm connected with my ancestry in a way that is truly profound, because I came into these fields without even knowing that he was a priest, astronomer, and studied astrology. I did that independently, but now I feel connected to something far greater. So when I look at myself wanting to go off and study astronomy at this point in my life, my grandfather did it. My grandfather did it, and he studied astrology. So why can't I do it? Who has astrology as my primary interest and study astronomy? Because once again, I also don't know of any other astrologers with PhDs in astronomy who are actively contributing to our field. And that is what I want to do. I want to put myself in a position of academic authority so that I can say from that space that this is what I feel as an insider, as opposed to being someone on the outside of academia or on the outside of this particular branch of academia and saying, no, you people are the ones who got it wrong. No, it's easier to attract flies with honey. And so I would rather be inside the system to know from within the system itself how I can make space for this astrology that I love. So even this desire to study astronomy is a greater part of my sacrifice to my students, primarily because I want my students to have the best. I want to be the best teacher for my students. I want my students to be the best. But beyond my students, the work that they will carry out into the world after I'm no longer here should be the golden standard of what this field entails, this field of astrology entails. And it cannot be, it cannot be the golden standard independent of them having a rigorous background in astronomy as well.
I believe if you do a PhD in America, which you seem to do, right? You want to go to America.
It's going to be in Canada. It's going to be in Canada.
So in Canada, it seems, I believe it's the same system, the Anglo system. So you attend classes, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we won't talk about that because that's another system. But the same what we have in Germany is the thesis, the doctor thesis. Mm-hmm. Does your thesis have a working title yet?
Well, it doesn't. So like I said earlier, nothing about my background has prepared me to study astronomy at a university level. So at the moment, I'm having to do advanced mathematics and physics and chemistry. So those are the courses that I'm currently doing.
Okay. And that's long distance courses, I suppose.
At the moment, those courses are long distance because those aren't even, I haven't even begun the program yet. I haven't even begun the astronomy program because these courses, I didn't need physics as a journalist and I didn't need chemistry as a journalist. So I have to now be getting these prerequisites, but then I'll start the program next year.
Next year?
Mm-hmm.
So we are talking about the PhD in front of your name or after your name in 3 years?
Well, 5 years.
5 years. Okay.
Because in astronomy, you don't just stop at the bachelor's degree. You can if you want to, but you go on to a PhD. So it will be in 5 years.
Oh, that's because you don't have a master, so you have to do the master stage first, and then
I have to. Well, not even that. Even if I had a master's degree in journalism, I would still have to start the astronomy from a bachelor's degree.
Okay. So did I miss something? Should I have asked you something which I didn't do?
I think that this is one of the better interviews I've ever had. This is truly, I have been truly astounded. Do you have a degree in broadcast journalism?
No, I'm a lawyer. I work with the government. But after I retired, I did 12 years of philosophy of science. That might help.
Well, there you go. It had to have been something because you've held the container for this space in a completely professional way, like a world-class journalist. So bravo to you.
Thank you. Okay, for the declaration of copyrights, I have the right to publish this uncut and unedited, and Mychal has the right to do whatever he wants to do with it. And we talk after I stop the recording. Thank you, Mychal, to the Bahamas, and best to your students. And they might have done a very good decision to study with you, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for stopping by, and I stop the recording.
Thank you.